Hey guys, so we're going to talk tonight about terrestrial biomes. So we're going to jump right in. I'm going to share my screen with you and we'll talk about each of the biomes and some characteristics of each and where we find them. Okay, so for college board purposes, as far as the AP exam, we're going to talk about 9 major biomes. So there are 9. There is the tundra. There are what we call boreal forests, or occasionally you'll see these called taiga. We have temperate rainforests. We have temperate deciduous forests. So a deciduous forest is one that loses its leaves on a seasonal basis. We have grasslands. We have what's called chaparral, deserts, savanna, and tropical rainforests. And then we'll also talk a little bit about this concept of vertical zonation. Most of our biomes are divided based on their latitude, but there are some biomes that can be determined by the elevation. Later on, we'll talk about aquatic ecosystems, marine ecosystems, and the interactions with humans. So first, what is a biome? It is a large, relatively distinct terrestrial region with a similar climate, soil, plants, and animals, regardless of where it occurs in the world. So this means that tundra has similar characteristics, whether it is in the Eastern Hemisphere or the Western Hemisphere. Same thing for deserts, whether they're found in the Northern, the Southern, the Eastern, or the Western Hemispheres. Deserts all share certain characteristics. There are, as I said, 9 major biomes. You'll find some textbooks that have 7. You'll find some textbooks that have 12. For our purposes this year, we'll talk about 9 major biomes. The type of biome is primarily determined by temperature and precipitation. Now, temperature can vary with latitude, but it also varies with elevation. So that's where we get into that concept of vertical zonation. That said, biomes can also be defined by winds, rapid temperature changes, fires, floods, other similar characteristics. So here's a quick world map. You'll notice that we find tundra up near the North Pole, and you'll find some tundra down near the South Pole, but very little. Below the tundra, you'll find boreal forests. Near the equator, you find your tropical rainforests. At elevations of 30 degrees north and south of the equator, you find a lot of deserts. This is where the vast majority of the deserts in the world are found. And between the rainforests and the deserts, you find savannas. So let's jump into some descriptions of some of these. When you look at temperature, so this is why we said that biomes are defined by both temperature and precipitation, because tropical rainforests and tropical deserts actually have very similar temperatures. The difference is all about the amount of precipitation that they receive. So we can think of this as kind of a triangle where hot has a lot of different biomes in it, but once it starts to get really cold, we reach the tundra, and there's really only one biome once you reach that temperature. Okay, let's talk about vertical zonation. So as you guys might know, as you go up in elevation, it gets colder. And so even at the same latitude, you can actually have different biomes based on that elevation. Traveling to higher altitudes has a similar effect as traveling to higher latitudes. And so there are several great examples of this all around the US. If you think about Colorado, you have deserts and you have alpine tundra in the same state and at the same latitude. It's all about elevation in the mountains. Okay, we're gonna start kind of at the coldest end. We'll start up near the North Pole and where we have tundra. So tundra is a treeless biome. It's in the far north. It has harsh, cold winters and extremely short summers. However, those summers can be quite hot. It gets very little precipitation, only 10 to 25 centimeters per year. So that's 4 to 10 inches per year. We have months where we get 4 inches. It has an extremely short growing season of only 50 to 160 days. It also has very nutrient poor soils. There's not a lot of organic material. There's this stuff called permafrost. Because permafrost is a layer of the soil that is, as it sounds, permanently frozen, this means that roots can't grow very deep into the tundra soil, which means that it's difficult to have large plants, things like trees, because they need to have deep root systems in order to reach water during times when there's not a lot. It also has a very low species richness. This is a term we haven't really talked about yet, but species richness means the overall number of species that are present in an area. The vegetation, because of the shallow roots, tends to be mostly grasses and sedges and a few little shrubs. It has a very simple food web, and it has low primary productivity. Because there aren't a lot of plants, this is not a very productive zone. Okay, let's go back and look at this climatograph. You will see these called climatographs. You'll see them called climographs. You'll see them called precipitation and temperature graphs. There are a lot of different names for them. But what I want you to notice is that there are two scales on this graph. There's average monthly temperature and there's average monthly precipitation. So the precipitation is the blue bars at the bottom and the average monthly temperature is the black line. So you'll notice that it's quite warm in the summer, okay, up to over 15 degrees Celsius, which doesn't feel terribly warm to us, but we're talking at least 60 degrees. But it gets very, very cold in the winter, negative 30 degrees Celsius. Okay, and you see again that average monthly precipitation is very low. It does have a seasonality to it. There is more rain in the late summer in the tundra than there is at any other time, but and it does have seasonal fluctuations in temperature. Okay, boreal forests. You'll also see these called taiga, T-A-I-G-A. So these are coniferous forests in the northern hemisphere. You will not see the boreal forest region in the southern hemisphere. It's found just south of the tundra. It does cover a fair amount of land on Earth, 11%. This is mostly in Canada, Asia, and Russia. The growing season here is a little longer than the tundra. You'll notice that the winter temperatures are a little bit warmer, but the summer temperatures are actually very similar. It has a medium primary productivity level, but it does get a lot more rain. It also does not have the permafrost, and so we see forests, we see trees, and lots of growth. Soils here tend to be acidic. Most coniferous forests have acidic soil because conifers, also known as evergreen trees, those trees with cones, things that we think of as pine trees, tend to have very acidic leaves, and therefore the soil underneath them is also very acidic. The reason that we find so many conifers is that they tend to be fairly drought resistant. So you see a lot of firs and spruces. There's not a lot of large animals here, mostly small animals and migrating birds, but there are some large mammals like wolves, bear, and moose. So if we look at the Earth from above, you see the tundra closest to the pole, and that's in the kind of brownish color here on our map. And then you see boreal forest in the green. Okay, so as we continue moving down, We're moving south towards the equator. We come across temperate rainforests. This is a coniferous biome with cool weather, dense fog, and high precipitation. So a great example of this is the Northwest US. So think about Oregon and Washington. There is actually temperate rainforest. There's only one temperate rainforest area in the southeastern United States, and that actually is in the mountains of North Carolina. So if you guys have ever been up to Cashiers or to Lake Glenville, that's actually a temperate rainforest area. Very, very high precipitation, more than 125 centimeters per year. And you'll notice now that we've flipped the script and the rain is actually heaviest in the winter. As far as temperature, it tends to have mild winters and cool summers. And this tends to be a medium-high productive in terms of primary productivity. So I want to go back to the North Carolina example because one of the reasons that Lake Glenville and that whole area is a temperate rainforest is that zonal elevation. So even though the area around it in North Carolina tends to be hotter because it is up so high, it's a temperate rainforest. Okay, in temperate rainforests, the soils are nutrient poor because these cooler temperatures tend to slow the decomposition of the leaves and needles that fall on the forest floor, but they're very high in organic material. The dominant vegetation is large evergreen trees. So again, those conifers. In some areas, we'll find old growth forests. That's more true in the Pacific Northwest than it is in North Carolina. There is a variety of cool climate animal life. It does have a very high species richness. You will see a lot of different plants and animals here. These areas also tend to be very heavily logged. So looking at our climatograph, we can see in a temperate, we're moving on to a new biome, temperate deciduous forest. So now we're talking about forests that have seasons, okay? The deciduous means trees that drop their leaves in the fall and stay leafless all winter and have new leaves emerge in the spring. So this occurs in temperate areas with a moderate amount of precipitation between 75 and 150 centimeters per year. Remember in the rainforest that we had over 125 centimeters per year. It does have seasonal variation in temperatures, hot summers, and cold winters. This is a very highly productive area. Most of this area is considered to be temperate deciduous forest biome. So here's a picture. Okay, our topsoil here in temperate deciduous forests is very rich in organic material and frequently underlain by clay. The vegetation is primarily deciduous trees like oak and maple and beech. You have deer, bear, lots and lots of small mammals, and lots of amphibians and reptiles. Most of this biome land area has been regenerated. It has been farmed. It has been harvested for trees, and much of it has regenerated. The eastern United States is a great example of how quickly nature will return things to temperate deciduous forest given the opportunity. Okay, so grasslands. We definitely do not have those here in southeastern Virginia. I'm going to move this down so you guys can see the map here. So grasslands are these light green areas that you can see on the map. They tend to have hot summers, cold winters, and not enough precipitation to support trees. So now, although there's no permafrost, so roots can penetrate deeply, there's not enough rain to support trees. So only 25 to 75 centimeters per year. You can have tall grass prairies or short grass prairies. 90% of this biome worldwide has been lost to farmland. Very, very little of it is left in its wild state. It does tend to have a reasonably high, medium high primary productivity because the grasses grow so thickly, but without the larger plants, it can't really reach high productivity. Again, wide seasonal variation in temperature and wide seasonal variation in rain. And again, that rain is peaking in the summer, just as it does in the temperate deciduous forest. Okay. It does have a very thick organic horizon, a very rich organic horizon, because there is so much organic material, and it's warm enough for it to decompose. So it has very rich soil. Because there are periodic fires in the grasslands, the dominant vegetation tends to be grasses. That's also contributed to by the low amount of precipitation. Used to be covered in bison, no longer true in the American grasslands, but smaller animals are still present, like prairie dogs and ferrets. Okay, so this one can be very difficult to distinguish from grassland. So I want to talk a little bit about chaparral. It's also one that very few are really familiar with and comfortable with. So chaparral is also called a Mediterranean climate. So if we think about Greece and Turkey or Southern California, it has mild, moist winters. So you notice on our climatograph that the winters receive much more rain than the summers. It tends to have hot, dry summers. As a result of those hot, dry summers, it tends to have frequent fires. Because it receives very little rain, it has a pretty low productivity as well. So the soil is thin, it's not very fertile, it tends to be very rocky, and it also tends to be a very hilly region. You tend to get very dense growth of evergreen shrubs. It's very lush and green in the growing season, and as soon as the rain stops, it turns brown and looks very barren. You do have deer, other small mammals, chipmunks, and lots of birds in chaparral. Okay, deserts. I think you're probably all fairly familiar with these. We are specifically talking about hot deserts. You will also occasionally see the term cold deserts used to refer to tundra. So a hot desert is a biome where the lack of precipitation limits plant growth. That is its defining characteristic. Okay, temperature can vary greatly seasonally as well as in a single day. It gets less than 25 centimeters per year of rain. It has very low primary productivity. Deserts are characterized by the plant life being very waxy and heavy. So in the US, and in fact in the Western Hemisphere, we tend to think of cacti. There are similar plants in the Eastern Hemisphere, but they're not technically cacti. In the desert, soils are very low in nutrients. They're very high in salts because what rain does fall evaporates very quickly, leaving behind the salt in the soil. Animals in the desert tend to be very small in order to be able to regulate their temperature easily. They also tend to be nocturnal, so that they come out when it is cooler. And you do have a lot of reptiles in the desert. Okay, so savannas. Not much in the way of savannas in the United States, but there are savannas in Central America, Mexico, also in Africa and the Middle East. Savannas are grasslands, but they are tropical grasslands. They do have more trees than grasslands do. Temperature does not vary a lot during the year. So the seasonal regulation in the savanna is all about precipitation. So the rainy season is the winter, and they do get a fair amount of rain, 76 to 150 centimeters per year. Therefore, it does have a medium level of productivity. Soil tends to be low in nutrients because that rainy season does tend to come with a lot of flooding, which leaches the nutrients out of the soil. You have wide expanses of grass. You have occasional trees like the acacia trees that you see in the picture. It is a very fire adapted landscape. And you have lots of ungulates or hoofed animals. You have large predators, lions, hyenas, cheetahs. So this is an area with a high diversity of fauna. All right, and our last biome is the tropical rainforest. So this is the most diverse biome on the planet. It is a very species-rich biome. It occurs very near the equator, where the climate is warm and moist throughout the year. Very, very heavy precipitation, 200 to 450 centimeters per year. It is the most productive biome, and it is the most species-rich biome. Interestingly, although it is a very productive biome, it actually has very nutrient-poor soil. The nutrients are tied up in the vegetation. They are not in the soil. Rainforests generally have at least 3 distinct canopy layers. They have the underbrush, they have the mid-range, and then they have the upper canopy. There's a lot of evidence that suggests that there are the most insect species in the world in the rainforest. Certainly there are the most reptiles and amphibians. In fact, there's a lot of evidence that suggests that there are more undiscovered species in the rainforest than discovered. Okay, so that's it for biomes. If you guys have questions, please let me know.